The moment I stepped into that hospital room, I could feel the air leave my chest. My dad was alive, sitting up, the heart monitor beeping steadily beside him. But he didn't look at me. Not even a flicker of recognition. Not for me, not for my son. Just an empty stare toward the television bolted to the corner of the room. I wanted to believe he didn't see us, that maybe he was groggy or confused from the medication. But deep down, I knew better. He saw us, and he chose not to care. It had been 3 years since we'd last spoken. 3 years since he shut the door on our relationship after my mother's funeral. He blamed me for everything that came after. For raising Noah alone, for not fixing my broken marriage, for not living the kind of life he approved of. And when my mother died, it was like he sealed off the last piece of himself that might have cared. Now here we were. Me, standing in that sterile room, holding the hand of my 6-year-old son who had never done anything to deserve being ignored like that, and my father cold as ever, pretending we weren't there. I told myself to stay calm, be the adult. Don't react, don't cry, just be there for Noah. I tried to focus on my son's soft fingers wrapped around mine. I could feel him squeeze my hand, then let go. Noah stepped forward. "Hi, Grandpa," he said in the softest, brightest voice. My dad didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't say a word. He just stared through us like we were ghosts. I felt my throat tighten. All those years of silence and now this. After a stroke? After everything we'd already lost? I stood there, frozen, my mouth dry, trying to find something, anything to say that wouldn't make it worse. But I didn't have to. Noah reached into his pocket. I hadn't noticed him grab anything before we came in. I was too busy rehearsing how I'd react if my dad yelled or cried or begged us to leave. But Noah, in his small, curious way, had come prepared for something else entirely. He took out a tiny silver keychain, dull, scratched, and a little bent. It was shaped like a horse. It didn't look like much. But the moment he held it up in his little palm, I felt the world shift. He walked over to my father's hospital tray and gently set it down. "Grandpa," he said, "you dropped this 3 years ago." That sentence, those 7 words. I watched my dad's face. At first, nothing. Then his eyes locked on the keychain. Something flickered behind them, something that hadn't been there when we walked in. Not anger, not frustration, recognition. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I was too busy trying to understand what was happening, because suddenly, everything changed. His posture, his eyes, his silence. It cracked, just for a second. And in that second, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: regret. My name is Sienna Blake. I'm a single mother, a nurse, and someone who spent most of her adult life trying to earn the approval of a man who rarely gave it. My father, Martin Blake, is a retired mechanic, sharp-minded, proud, the kind of man who believed in hard work, silence, and keeping emotions buried beneath a hardened shell. He never really understood me. I wasn't what he expected his only daughter to become. I didn't follow the plan. I married someone he didn't respect. I left that marriage after 4 years of pain and disappointment, and I chose to raise my son, Noah, on my own without looking back. He never forgave me for any of it. My mother, Joanna, was the only bridge between us. She had a quiet way of softening his sharp edges. She would say things like, "He means well," or "He just doesn't know how to say he loves you." And for a while, I believed her. But when she passed away 3 years ago, that bridge collapsed completely. I still remember the day of her funeral. It was a gray, windless afternoon. After the service, my father barely spoke to anyone. When I tried to talk to him, to offer some kind of shared comfort, he cut me off with a single line. "You chose your mess, Sienna. Don't bring it to my doorstep." I remember those words with painful clarity. They weren't shouted. He didn't raise his voice. That made them hit harder. That was the last time we spoke. After that, I stopped trying. I focused on Noah. He became my center, my reason for holding it all together. Being a single parent isn't easy, but he made it feel our worth every exhausting minute. He's the kind of kid who notices things most people miss. He watches, he remembers, he cares deeply, even when he doesn't fully understand what he's caring about. He would sometimes ask about Grandpa. I told him what I could without saying too much, that Grandpa lived alone, that he had a garage full of tools and used to build birdhouses for Grandma, that he loved classic trucks and always smelled like sawdust and coffee. Noah would nod and quietly draw pictures of old men in flannel shirts and label them Grandpa. Then one morning, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Carol, my dad's younger sister. She never called unless something was wrong. "He's in the hospital," she said. "Stroke. It wasn't a major one, but they're keeping him for observation. You should know." I didn't ask many questions. I just sat there holding the phone, staring at the floor while Noah played with his Legos in the next room. My first instinct was to say nothing, to leave the past buried. But something in me shifted. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the part of me that still held on to some sliver of hope, however small. That evening, I told Noah we were going to the hospital. "To see Grandpa?" he asked. I nodded. "He's not feeling well." He didn't ask why we hadn't seen him in so long. He didn't ask if Grandpa missed us. He just smiled and said, "I want to show him something." He ran off to his room before I could ask what it was. I heard him rummaging through his drawers, then the sound of his dinosaur toy box opening. When he came back out, his hands were empty. I assumed he'd changed his mind or forgotten. I didn't press it. I was too busy preparing for whatever emotional storm was waiting for me behind those hospital doors. The next morning, we drove across town in silence. Noah looked out the window, humming softly to himself. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than I needed to. I kept playing out every possible scenario in my head. What if he yelled at me? What if he told us to leave? What if he looked at my son and saw nothing at all? I told myself to stay calm, to keep my heart sealed up tight. I reminded myself that I was doing this for Noah, not for some fairy tale ending. I didn't expect kindness or warmth. I didn't expect healing. But I should have known better than to underestimate the quiet power of a child who still believes in broken things being fixed. The hospital lobby was cold in that overly sanitized way, with 2 white walls and a faint smell of disinfectant and overbrewed coffee. I checked in at the front desk and held Noah's hand as we walked down a long hallway. The closer we got to my father's room, the more pressure I felt in my chest. It was the kind of weight that builds slowly like a dam about to crack. Noah skipped a little beside me. He had no idea how heavy that walk was for me. I admired him for that. He didn't carry the things I did. He didn't know about the silence between my father and me, or the words never said, or the things we lost the day my mother died. He was just excited to meet his grandpa. When we reached room 214, I stopped outside the door for a moment. I could hear the faint sound of a news anchor on TV. I took a breath and pushed it open. My dad was sitting upright in bed, his arms crossed over his chest, remote in hand. He looked thinner, paler than I remembered. The gray in his beard was more pronounced, his hands slightly trembling as he adjusted the blanket. But his eyes were sharp, alert. And when he turned to look at me, there was no confusion in them, just silence. "Hi, Dad," I said quietly. He stared at me for one long second, then turned back to the TV. No reaction, no expression, nothing. Noah peeked around my leg. "Hi, Grandpa." Still nothing. Not a smile, not a blink, not even the briefest glance at my son. I stood there, frozen, unsure what to do. I had prepared myself for tension. I had braced for harsh words, or maybe a dismissive comment. But I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected him to act like we weren't even standing there. I stepped closer, trying to break the fog. "I heard you had a stroke. We came to check on you, just wanted to see how you were doing." He didn't answer, didn't acknowledge me. His eyes stayed glued to the TV. Noah let go of my hand and walked to the edge of the hospital bed. His tiny fingers curled around the metal rail. He tilted his head and looked up at my father with curiosity and something that looked a lot like hope. "I brought something," Noah said. I looked down at him, confused. I didn't know what he meant. He hadn't told me he brought anything. My father didn't turn toward him. I could feel my pulse pounding behind my ears. The silence was unbearable. I tried to say something, anything that might break through. Nothing came out. My throat felt tight, like it was being clenched by a fist I couldn't see. It wasn't just that he ignored me. It was the way he ignored Noah. He had never made the effort to meet his grandson, never sent a birthday card, never asked for a photo. And now, when the opportunity stood right in front of him in the form of a sweet, open-hearted little boy offering kindness, he did nothing. I sat down in the chair beside the bed, more to stop myself from collapsing than to get comfortable. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him what it was all for, why he pushed everyone away, why he couldn't even pretend to care about the only piece of his daughter he hadn't already lost. But I didn't say anything. I just sat there, feeling like a guest in a place I never should have come to. Noah leaned closer to my dad's tray table. His voice was soft, not sad, not angry, just matter of fact. "You used to drive a red truck, right?" That got a flicker of movement from my father. His eyes shifted slightly, almost toward Noah. Almost. "You came to our house once," Noah continued. "I think you dropped something." My heart stopped. Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out the small silver keychain. It looked so small in his hand, almost like a toy. He placed it gently on the tray beside the untouched glass of water. "Grandpa," he said, "you dropped this 3 years ago." And that was when the silence changed, not because anyone spoke, but because suddenly it was filled with something new, recognition. For a moment, my father didn't move. He stared at the small silver horse like he didn't know what it was, but I could see in his face that he did. I remembered it from when I was a little girl. It used to hang from the key ring of his red Chevy truck. I hadn't seen it since the day of my mother's funeral. That was the day he stormed out of my house and never came back. I never thought I'd see that keychain again. I had no idea Noah had been holding on to it all this time. He must have picked it up from the driveway that day, tucked it away somewhere only a 6-year-old would think to keep something so small and forgotten. I had asked him before if he remembered my dad being there that day, and he just shook his head. But clearly, he did. Not the words, not the shouting, but something about that moment had stayed with him. And now he was standing in front of the man who had turned his back on both of us, offering him a piece of the past with no expectation and no resentment, just a quiet sense of trust that this small object still mattered. My father's hand twitched, not from the stroke, but from something else, emotion, memory, maybe guilt. I leaned forward slightly in the chair, not to push or explain, but just to be ready in case something changed. I didn't want Noah to feel like he had done something wrong. He had done something incredibly brave, and I needed him to know that, no matter how my father responded. Noah stepped back after placing the keychain down. He didn't say anything else. He just looked up at my dad with the kind of open heart only a child can have. My father finally reached for the keychain. His hand trembled as he picked it up. He held it between his fingers, turning it over slowly. His eyes didn't leave it. For a long time, he just stared. I could see the tightness in his jaw. The lines around his mouth deepened like he was fighting something inside. Something old, something heavy. He didn't look at me, but he finally spoke. "Where did you get this?" Noah answered him without hesitation. "You dropped it, at our house. I kept it safe." My father swallowed hard. His voice came again, lower, rougher. "You kept it all this time?" Noah nodded. "Yeah. Mom said it was yours. I thought maybe you'd want it back." I waited for my father to speak again, but instead he looked up at Noah. Really looked at him. For the first time. His expression softened in a way I hadn't seen since before my mother got sick. There was something fragile in his eyes now, like the walls he'd built so carefully around himself were starting to splinter. He turned to me, slowly, as if it hurt more to face me than it did to speak. His mouth opened slightly and he let out a long, shaky breath. "I thought I lost this." His voice cracked as he said it. He didn't sound angry. He sounded tired, worn down by something that had gone unspoken for far too long. I could feel the lump rising in my throat, but I kept my face steady. I didn't want to interrupt whatever this moment was becoming. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. He looked at the keychain again, then back at Noah. "Thank you." 2 words, but they landed like a weight inside the room. They weren't just for the keychain. They were for being seen, for being remembered, for not being forgotten despite all the ways he had tried to disappear from our lives. I nodded at Noah, who smiled without saying anything. My father looked back at me, this time with less steel in his eyes. "I didn't think you'd come." I paused for a moment, then answered honestly. I didn't think I would either, but he wanted to meet you." We sat in that room together, the three of us, with no more explanations and no more rehearsed speeches, just a tiny metal horse on a scratched hospital tray and the quiet beginning of something I never expected to find again. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the start of something like it. My father's hand stayed resting on the keychain like he wasn't ready to let it go. He held it the way someone holds a photograph they thought they had lost forever. Not tightly, but with care, like he was afraid it might disappear if he blinked. I watched him try to form words, but they kept slipping away before they reached his mouth. For so long, I imagined this moment happening differently. I thought maybe he'd argue with me, tell me I'd misunderstood him. Maybe he'd deny ever turning his back on us. I never expected this silence. Not this quiet ache, not this hesitation, as if speaking too soon would shatter something delicate between us. Noah sat down in the chair next to mine. He looked up at my father and smiled, like nothing was wrong at all, like the man in that bed hadn't ignored us completely just 10 minutes earlier. Children have a way of skipping past what hurts. They leap straight into love, no questions asked. My father reached out with his free hand and placed it gently on the side of Noah's head. His fingers brushed the curls behind my son's ear. It was the smallest gesture, but my entire body tensed when I saw it. That one touch said everything he hadn't yet figured out how to say. Noah leaned into it without hesitation. "You look like your mom when she was your age," my father said. His voice was hoarse but steady. I froze. That sentence landed with more force than I was ready for. He hadn't said my name. He hadn't looked at me when he said it. But it was the first time he had acknowledged any part of me with warmth in years. Noah grinned. "She showed me pictures. You had a beard even back then." My father gave a weak smile. "Still do." There was a pause, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt like something was being made room for. I shifted in my seat. "He's been asking about you for a long time." My dad nodded slowly. "I figured you'd moved on." "I tried," I said. "But Noah never let me forget. He kept asking if you were coming back, if you'd visit, if maybe you'd call." He looked down, ashamed. I didn't know what to say. After what I said to you that day, I wasn't proud of how I left. I could feel emotion creeping into my chest. I didn't want to cry, not now, not when I had spent years locking those feelings away. But hearing him say that, I wasn't proud. It pierced through everything I had been holding back. "I was angry," he continued. "Your mom had just died, and I needed someone to blame. You were there, and I didn't know how to deal with losing her. So I made losing you feel like a choice, like it was something I controlled." I didn't say anything right away. There was nothing clever to say, nothing to fix it. I just let the words hang there. Noah looked between us. "You're not mad anymore?" My dad's voice cracked. "No, son, I'm not mad." I watched my father reach across the tray and hold out the keychain to Noah. "Thank you for keeping this safe." Noah took it, then hesitated. "You can have it back now." My dad smiled, but he shook his head. "Number. I think you should keep it. Looks like you've taken better care of it than I ever did." Noah beamed and clutched the tiny horse in his fist like it was made of gold. I saw it then, the moment something shifted in my father's face. He looked at Noah, but then his eyes moved to me. And for the first time in years, he didn't look through me. He looked at me. There was no speech, no dramatic apology, just a long, steady gaze that held weight. And in that look, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a child standing in his garage, handing him a wrench and hoping he would say I'd done it right. I saw love, worn, imperfect, uncertain, but real. He cleared his throat. "Would it be all right if you brought him back again sometime? I'd like to get to know him." I nodded, my voice caught in my throat. "Yeah, I'd like that." Something broke open in my chest. Not pain, not relief, just a deep, quiet sense that maybe, just maybe, we were finally finding our way back to each other. A few weeks passed and we went back to the hospital. This time, my dad was sitting in a wheelchair by the window when we walked in. The television was off, the tray was cleared. He was dressed in a sweater I recognized from years ago, one my mom had knitted. It was a small detail, but it mattered to me. It told me he was trying in his own way to come back from the place he had disappeared into. When Noah saw him, he ran straight over and started talking about everything. His new toy dinosaur, a bug he found in the backyard, and how he wanted to build a robot horse one day. My father listened to every word, not half listened, not nodded without hearing. He looked him in the eye, asked questions, laughed at the silly parts, and gave real answers to Noah's endless curiosity. It was the first time in years that I saw him as someone more than just the man who had hurt me. I saw him as a grandfather, maybe not the perfect one, not the warmest or the most expressive, but one who was present. After that visit, Noah asked if we could go again, and the time after that, it was my dad who asked the nurse to call me and invite us back. He was scheduled for rehab in a nearby facility, and he wanted to make sure we knew where to find him. We never talked about the years in between, not directly. There was no moment where we unpacked all the pain, but the healing didn't come from talking. It came from the quiet things. A shared meal from the hospital cafeteria. The way he started keeping a small notebook of questions Noah asked him so he could look up the answers later. The photo he asked me to print out and leave on his nightstand, it was one of all three of us taken during that second visit. Nothing posed, nothing perfect, just us. One night after Noah went to bed, I sat in the kitchen and took out that keychain. Noah had given it back to me for safekeeping. He said, "Grandpa said it's mine, but I want you to hold it for both of us." I ran my fingers over the worn metal and thought about what it meant to carry something for someone else, to hold on to a small symbol of connection, even when everything else feels broken. My 6-year-old had done that without hesitation. He had carried a piece of my father for years without knowing its full weight and handed it back at the exact moment it mattered most. I used to think strength meant building walls, that if I could protect myself from disappointment, I wouldn't have to feel the sharp edge of rejection again. But Noah showed me something different. He taught me that sometimes strength looks like remembering, like keeping something safe, even when you don't understand why it matters, like believing in people before they've earned it. I didn't walk out of that hospital room with all the answers. There are still scars between me and my father, still spaces we haven't filled. But now there's also something else. A thread, a connection that didn't exist before, and it started with one small sentence from a 6-year-old. "Grandpa, you dropped this." That moment changed everything. It reminded my father who he used to be. It reminded me that healing doesn't always come in the way you expect. It sneaks in through the kindness of a child, through something as simple as an old keychain pulled from a pocket at exactly the right time. I used to carry pain. Now, I carry hope, and if someone like my father, who held on to his silence for years, can be reached with nothing more than a memory offered with love, then maybe there's more possibility for change in this world than we give it credit for. Maybe we're all carrying something for someone else, waiting for the right moment to return it. If this story touched you, share it with someone you care about. Maybe it will remind them that even broken relationships can begin again, and that sometimes the smallest act of love can open the heaviest doors. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone you've been distant from, or if it gave you a little hope that broken relationships can still find healing, then don't keep it to yourself, like the video if it moved you. Share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Comment below and tell me what part hit you the hardest, or share your own story. I read every single one. And if you want more true stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. Thank you for watching, and thank you for feeling this story with me. I'll see you in the next one.